Hello there, and welcome to the deep somna. There is a moment, just before sleep pulls you under, when the mind loosens its grip on the day. The thoughts that felt so urgent an hour ago begin to thin and drift. The room around you grows quiet. Your breathing, without you asking it to, begins to slow on its own. This is where we meet tonight. You don't need to be anywhere else. You don't need to solve anything, or remember anything, or prepare for anything. You are exactly where you are meant to be, here, in the dark, with a little while left before sleep takes you the rest of the way. And if your mind is still running, still turning over the things it carries, the tasks undone, the conversations replaying, the low hum of plans and worries, that's all right. That's what minds do. We're going to give yours something soft to rest on. Not a problem to solve, not a lesson to pass. Just a journey, slow and quiet and deep. Tonight, we are going to descend. Not upward into space, though the sky above you is full of its own mysteries, and the darkness outside your window goes all the way to the stars. Tonight we go in the other direction, down through the surface of something vast and dark and alive, down through water, down past the last reach of sunlight, past the zones where color fades and pressure builds, and the world becomes something you have no words for yet, past the places where the seafloor begins to look less like Earth and more like the surface of another planet entirely. We are going to explore the deep ocean. Most of it has never been seen by human eyes. Most of it has never been lit by anything other than the bodies of the creatures that live there. Soft pulses of cold blue light drifting through a silence that has no comparison anywhere on land. The deep ocean is not an absence, it is a presence. Ancient, patient, and full of things we are only beginning to understand. You can let your body soften into the bed now. Let the weight of the day press gently downward. Let your shoulders release whatever they've been carrying since this morning. Let your jaw unclench, if it's been clenching. Let your hands uncurl. We are going to go slowly. There's no hurry here. The ocean, when you stand at its edge during the day, looks familiar. Bright water, breaking waves, salt in the air. You can see down a meter or two, maybe more on a clear, calm day, and it looks blue and ordinary and known. Children play in the shallows. Boats move across the surface. Everything is in sunlight and motion, but the ocean has a surface, and it has a depth. And those two things are almost entirely different worlds. The surface is a place of weather, of wind and temperature change, of constant exchange between water and air. The depth is something else altogether. The depth is permanent. The surface is where the sunlight plays. It is where phytoplankton drift in vast, invisible clouds, turning carbon dioxide and light into sugar, forming the base of a food chain that reaches all the way to the largest animals ever to exist on this planet. It is where storms stir the water into foam, where dolphins leap and seabirds hunt, where the ocean and the atmosphere are in constant, intimate conversation about the heat of the planet and the chemistry of the air. But that thin, bright, sunlit layer is not most of the ocean. The ocean has an average depth of around 3.5 kilometers. In many places it goes much deeper. The sunlit zone, the part where photosynthesis is possible, where there is enough light for plants to grow, extends only to about 200 meters. 200 meters. That is less than 6% of the way to the average seafloor. Everything below that threshold is beyond the reach of the sun. Below 200 meters, even on the clearest day above, sunlight fades to almost nothing. At 500 meters, you would need your eyes fully adjusted to detect even the faintest blue-green ghost of it. By 1,000 meters, it is gone. Completely. Permanently. Not the darkness of a room at night, when your eyes eventually adjust and the shapes of furniture emerge from the dimness. This is a darkness that has never had light. A darkness that has existed, in some places, for millions of years without interruption. And it is enormous. If you took every environment on Earth, every forest, every desert, every mountain valley, every river delta, every grassland, and compared their combined volume to the volume of the deep ocean, the deep ocean would exceed them all. It is, by any reasonable measure, the largest habitat on the planet. The majority of the livable space on Earth is in the deep sea. And yet it is the least mapped, the least understood, and in many ways the most unknown place beneath our feet. Let that settle for a moment. You don't have to remember the numbers. Just carry the feeling of it. A world the size of everything, hiding just below the water's skin. When the first oceanographers began trying to understand what lay beneath the sea, they worked with blunt instruments. They lowered weighted ropes over the sides of ships and measured how far they went before they touched bottom. This was called sounding, and it told them the depth, but nothing else. They dragged nets across the seafloor and examined what came up in the mesh. Though much of what lived there was too fragile to survive the long pull to the surface, arriving as fragments and shreds of things that had once been whole. These methods worked, but they were slow and incomplete, like trying to draw a detailed map of a continent by poking it with a long stick in the dark. Over time, sonar changed things. Sound travels well in water, much better than light, and researchers found they could send pulses of sound downward and measure the time it took for the echo to return. The deeper the water, the longer the return. From those echoes, shapes began to emerge from the blank. Ridges, trenches, plains that stretched for thousands of kilometers without a feature. Mountain ranges nobody had known existed. But even with sonar, the picture remained partial. Mapping the seafloor in fine detail requires ships to travel back and forth in long, overlapping passes, like mowing an enormous lawn, and the ocean is very large and ships are very slow. As of today, less than a quarter of the ocean floor has been mapped in high resolution. We have more detailed maps of the surfaces of Mars and the Moon than we do of the seafloor beneath our own oceans. This isn't a failure of effort or interest. It is a reflection of scale and of difficulty, and of the simple truth that the deep is hard to reach and expensive to study. There is a project called Seabed 2030, a global collaboration of scientists and research institutions with the goal of mapping the entire ocean floor by the end of this decade. It is a quiet, methodical, almost humble kind of ambition. Not a race to a distant planet, not a dramatic expedition to a mountaintop, just a slow, careful charting of the world below the world. Ship by ship, pass by pass, one swath of seafloor at a time. You can let your breathing deepen now. There's nothing to figure out. Let the images drift through your mind like shapes seen through still water. Softened, slow, not quite solid. The ocean has layers, And as we descend through them, the world changes in ways that are almost impossible to fully imagine from up here on land. The uppermost layer is the sunlit zone, full of life and light and the constant interchange between water and air. Below that, the mesopelagic zone, sometimes called the twilight zone, runs from about 200 meters down to 1,000. Here, the light is faint and blue-green, just barely enough for some eyes to detect a faint glow. The pressure at the bottom of this zone is already 100 times what you feel at sea level. The water is cold, just a few degrees above freezing in many parts of the world. Creatures here have evolved to exist in a world that is neither fully lit nor fully dark, and some of them spend their days hiding in the cold deep and rising at night to feed in the warmer waters above. Below 1,000 meters, the bathypelagic zone begins. Here, the last trace of sunlight is gone, permanently. It is cold, around 4 degrees Celsius in most of the ocean. The pressure is hundreds of times greater than what we breathe against. And yet there is life here. Strange, slow, luminous life, going about its business in a darkness that has never known day. Below that, the abyssal zone stretches from about 4,000 meters to 6,000. This is where the Great Flat Plains lie. Sediment that has been falling from above for millions of years, particle by particle, has settled here into a deep, soft layer. The abyssal plains are some of the flattest places on Earth, smoother than almost anything on land, shaped by nothing faster than the weight of geological time. And then, below even the abyssal plains, in scattered places around the world, the seafloor opens into trenches. The Hadal Zone, the deepest cuts in the planet's crust, where tectonic plates have collided and one has been pressed beneath the other, dragging the ocean floor down into a wound that can reach 11 kilometers below the surface. 11 kilometers. Mount Everest, the highest point on land, rises about 8.5 kilometers above sea level. If you could lift Everest off the ground and lower it into the Mariana Trench, the deepest of these deep places, its peak would still be more than 2 kilometers below the surface of the sea. You don't need to hold all of this in your mind at once. You can let the depths blur and settle like sediment through still water. What matters is the feeling. A world of layers, each stranger and quieter than the one above, descending into a silence so complete it has its own kind of presence. In 1960, 2 men sat inside a steel sphere, roughly the size of a small bathroom, and sank to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Their names were Jock Pickard and Don Walsh. Their vessel was called the Tree Stay. It was not sleek or fast. It was heavy and deliberate, built for pressure, not speed. They descended for nearly 5 hours. The walls contracted slightly around them from the force of the water pressing in. A small viewing panel cracked under the pressure as they neared the bottom, a sharp sound in the silence, though it held. When they finally settled on the seafloor, they had gone deeper than any human being had ever been. They turned on their lights, and in the small circle of illumination at the bottom of the world, they saw something they had not fully expected to find. Movement. Life. A flatfish, resting on the sediment. A shrimp-like creature, passing through the beam. Not just microbial life. Not some barely surviving scrap of biology clinging to existence. Actual visible animals, moving in the dark, going about their business in the deepest place on Earth. It changed how scientists thought about what was possible. It shifted the question from whether life could survive in such places to something more interesting and more generous. How does life survive in such places? And what does it look like? And how long has it been here? And what else might we find if we keep looking? Fewer than 24 people have been to the Challenger Deep since that first descent. 12 people have walked on the moon. In some ways, the bottom of our own ocean is harder to reach than the surface of another world. Let that thought drift past you like something glimpsed through deep water. Let your eyes grow heavy. We are only beginning. The water above you right now, even if you're far from any ocean, is connected to the sea. The air you breathe has passed over it. The rain that falls on the land has risen from it. The world is not a collection of separate things. It is a continuous system, cycling and breathing and moving in ways that are invisible from where you sit, but real and constant nonetheless. And beneath the sea's surface, somewhere, right now, in a darkness you will never see with your own eyes, something is glowing. A small creature, soft and translucent, drifts through water that has never known sunlight. From its body comes a pulse of blue light. Not bright enough to read by, not bright enough to cast a shadow. Just a quiet glow, a breath of living chemistry, floating through the dark. It does this because that is how it lives. The glow is language and survival, and simply the expression of its biology, working exactly as evolution has shaped it to work. Over millions of years, in the permanent dark, you can feel your own breathing now, slow and even. The room is dark. You are warm. There is nothing required of you. We will go deeper now. Slowly. One quiet thing at a time. There is something the deep ocean does that no other place on Earth quite manages. It makes time feel different. On land, time is everywhere. You see it in the seasons, in the growth of trees, in the way light moves across a room in the course of a day. You feel it in hunger and fatigue, in the shortening of days and the first cold of autumn. The world on the surface is built of change, of cycle, of constant becoming and dissolving. Everything is turning into something else. But in the deep ocean, where there is no sun and no moon and no season, where the temperature varies by only a fraction of a degree over centuries, where the darkness is absolute and has been that way since before human beings existed as a species, in that place, time moves more like water through sediment than like the ticking of a clock. It moves, but you cannot easily see it moving. It accumulates, but without the markers we use to measure it on the surface. Creatures in the deep grow slowly. They reproduce rarely. They live, in some cases, for lengths of time that feel almost impossible to hold in the human mind. There are cold water corals growing in the darkness of the North Atlantic that are older than some of the world's great cathedrals. Not the reef as a whole, just individual coral organisms, building their calcium carbonate structures at a rate of a few millimeters per year, piling new growth on top of ancient growth, reaching back across centuries of slow, cold accumulation. A coral that began growing before Columbus crossed the Atlantic may still be growing now, in the dark, at the bottom of the sea, adding a fraction of a millimeter to its structure this very year. There is a shark, the Greenland shark, that lives in the deep, frigid waters of the North Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean. It is not a fast animal. It moves at a pace that seems almost languorous, even in the cold. It grows by only about a centimeter per year, scientists trying to determine how old these animals could get. Developed a method of analysis, using the radiocarbon signatures trapped in the proteins of the shark's eye lens, tissue that forms before birth and never refreshes itself over the animal's lifetime. What they found in some individuals suggested ages of 400 years or more. Some may be approaching 500. A Greenland shark that is alive right now may have been born before the invention of the steam engine, before the first telescope was trained on the night sky, before the founding of many nations. It drifts through the cold dark, occasionally eating, occasionally resting, with no awareness of any of the human history that has accumulated above it. It simply exists, slowly, as it always has. You can let that image settle in you. The old shark, moving through the cold dark, unhurried. There is something in that image that is not strange, not alarming. There is something in it that is almost peaceful. Let your body be heavy now. Let the bed hold you. There's nothing to do. The life in the deep has developed strategies for survival that look, from the outside, almost like the strategies of a very patient and very careful person. Conserve energy, move slowly, use every resource completely. Wait. In a world where food is scarce, and the distances between meals can be vast, deep-sea creatures have had to become extraordinarily efficient. Many of them have metabolisms running at a fraction of the rate of comparable surface animals. Their hearts beat more slowly. Their cells carry on their work at a lower pace. Some of them can go weeks, even months, without eating, their bodies drawing on stored reserves with a patience that surface life rarely needs to match. And when food does come, they make the most of it. Nothing is wasted in the deep. When a whale dies somewhere in the upper ocean, its body begins to sink. It sinks for hours, sometimes days, falling through the water column like a slow, enormous meteor, drawing behind it a trail of scent and dissolved particles that spreads through the currents and carries the news of its arrival. And when it finally settles on the seafloor, miles below where it drew its last breath, it becomes something remarkable. A whale fall, scientists call it. That name carries its own quiet weight in a place where food arrives as a slow, thin rain of particles drifting down from the sunlit world above. A whale's body is an abundance almost beyond imagining. Tens of tons of organic material, rich in fats and proteins, resting on the seafloor like a gift that was not expected. The community that forms around a whale fall happens in stages, and each stage lasts for years. First come the mobile scavengers, hagfish, sleeper sharks, amphipods, rat-tail fish, drawn by the scent across vast distances, threading through the dark with the patience of animals that know how to follow faint signals for a long time. They strip the soft tissue from the bones with a thoroughness that, from a distance, might seem intense, but is simply the deep ocean being the deep ocean. Nothing wasted, everything used, the whole community organized around the steady transfer of organic material from one form to another. Then a second wave of organisms moves in as the easier work is done. Smaller animals that feed on the remaining material, on the enriched sediment gathering around the carcass, on the bacteria beginning to colonize every available surface. And then the bones themselves become a habitat, a long, slow feast for organisms that have evolved to do something almost no other animals on Earth can do. extract the fats locked inside bone. The bone-eating worms, given the memorable scientific name Osedax, which means bone eater, are not large. They are delicate, feathery things, anchored into the bone by root-like structures that dissolve the mineral matrix as they go. They carry bacteria inside them that help break down the lipids within the bone, turning the dense architecture of a whale's skeleton into a slow-burning source of energy. A single whale fall can support a rich community of organisms for decades. In some documented cases, over 100 species have been found at a single site, some of them found nowhere else. Organisms so specialized for this particular kind of feast that they appear to have evolved alongside the great whales over millions of years of shared history, each dependent on the other in ways too slow and too deep for easy observation. The deep ocean remembers, not like a mind, but like sediment. It accumulates and holds what comes to it, layer by careful layer. Let your thoughts drift. You don't need to hold any of this tightly. Let it be a landscape to drift through rather than facts to carry. There is another kind of life in the deep that requires an even more fundamental revision to how we think about what life needs. Along certain portions of the seafloor, the crust of the earth is thin. Tectonic plates pull apart, and from the gaps in the seafloor, superheated water pours out, water that has percolated down into the rock, absorbed minerals and tremendous heat from far below, and is now rising back up at temperatures that would destroy most biology on contact. These plumes of dark, mineral-rich water build up towering chimneys of precipitated minerals on the seafloor, some of them several stories tall, before slowly cooling and dispersing into the surrounding ocean. These are hydrothermal vents, and the ecosystems built around them have no need for the sun. They were discovered in 1977 by researchers working from a small submersible named Alvin in the Galapagos Rift in the Pacific. The scientists on that dive were not primarily biologists. They were geologists, expecting to find an interesting geological feature, a crack in the seafloor where plates were separating. What they found instead was a garden. Around the vents, in water clouded with mineral particles, and lit only by the submersible's own lights, there were animals everywhere. Tube worms in clusters so dense, they looked like fields of tall grass, their white tubes topped with red plumes waving in the current. Giant clams, far larger than any found near the surface. Blind shrimp, crabs, fish, an ecosystem as complex and layered as anything in a shallow tropical reef, built entirely without sunlight. The base of this ecosystem was not plants. It was bacteria. Microorganisms that had learned to use the chemical energy in the minerals pouring from the vents, especially hydrogen sulfide, a gas toxic to most life, as a source of metabolic power. This process, chemosynthesis, turns chemical energy the same way photosynthesis turns light energy into biological energy. It is a process as fundamental as any in biology. And in the deep sea, it still sustains entire worlds that predate the existence of anything like us. The tube worms themselves are remarkable. They can grow over 2 meters long, and they have no mouths, no stomachs, no digestive systems whatsoever. Their bodies are packed with chemosynthetic bacteria, billions of them, doing the metabolic work that the worm itself cannot do. The worm provides the bacteria with shelter and access to the raw materials they need. The bacteria provide the worm with the energy and organic compounds it needs to live. It is one of the most complete and elegant partnerships in the living world. They live in water that is just above freezing a few meters from the vent, and scalding right at the outflow. They have colonized this narrow thermal band with the precision of creatures that have been practicing for a very long time. You can imagine it loosely. A field of tall white tubes in the blackness, their red tips like flowers that have never seen light, the water around them shimmering faintly with heat, a slow drift of particles past. Quiet, strange, alive. Let your body sink deeper into wherever you are. The darkness around you is not empty. In the open water columns of the deep, beyond the vents and the seafloor, there is a nightly movement that is, in terms of sheer mass and coordination, the largest animal migration on Earth. It happens every day. Most people have never heard of it. As daylight fades at the surface, billions of creatures begin to rise from the deep. Not dozens, not millions, billions. Fish the size of a finger, squid, tiny crustaceans, jellyfish, krill, animals that have spent the daylight hours hiding in the cold dark, where they are invisible to the unlit zone, now rising in the shelter of darkness to feed in the richer, warmer waters above. They come up hundreds of meters. Some travel close to a kilometer, and then, as the sky begins to lighten again before dawn, they descend, back down into the cold and dark, back to safety. The movement is daily, rhythmic, governed by the changing light above and the safety of darkness, as regular as the turning of the earth. This migration carries carbon with it. The animals feed near the surface on organisms that have absorbed carbon from the atmosphere, and when they descend, they carry that carbon down with them, in their bodies, in their waste, effectively pumping it away from the surface, away from the air, into a part of the ocean where it can stay locked away for decades or centuries. It is called the biological pump, and it is one of the mechanisms by which the ocean moderates the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. The great migrations of the deep are not separate from the world you live in. They are part of the same system that makes the surface habitable. They are, in a quiet way, one of the reasons the air outside is breathable tonight. Let that be a thought you hold lightly. Not a weight, just a quiet kind of awe, the sort that comes with recognizing how much larger the world is than the part of it we can see. There are creatures in the deep that glow with their own light, and it is worth spending a little time with them, because there is something in bioluminescence that feels, to the human mind, like a kind of wonder. In water that has never known the sun, in cold and pressure and total darkness, living things make light. They do it through chemical reactions inside specialized cells. A molecule called luciferin reacts with an enzyme in the presence of oxygen and emits a photon of cool, efficient light. Almost no heat is produced. The light comes in shades of blue and green, and occasionally red, cool and soft, nothing like the warm light of fire or a lamp. The blue and green are most common because those wavelengths travel farthest in water. The creatures of the deep are in an ancient competition to be seen, or to see, or to be invisible, depending on their particular strategy. Some fish carry a light dangling in front of their mouths, a lure on a modified spine, glowing softly in the dark, waiting with infinite patience for something curious to come close enough to catch. Some squid release clouds of bioluminescent mucus when threatened, a glowing decoy that drifts in the dark, while the squid slips away in the confusion. Some small crustaceans flash in rapid patterns when disturbed, perhaps to startle a predator or to signal to others nearby that something dangerous is here. There are jellyfish that pulse with rings of faint light as they move through the water, their bells contracting and releasing in a slow, meditative rhythm. There are fish whose entire undersides glow faintly, producing light that matches the dim illumination filtering down from above, making them nearly invisible to anything looking up from below. Perhaps most striking of all is the scale. Bioluminescence is not unusual in the deep ocean. It is the norm. Estimates suggest that the majority of organisms in the mesopelagic zone are capable of producing light, which means that in the darkest part of Earth, the primary source of illumination is the bodies of living things. The deep ocean is not dark the way a sealed room is dark. It is dark the way a clear night sky is dark, punctuated, alive with cold small lights, scattered across an enormous darkness that makes each glow more noticeable, more remarkable. You can close your eyes now. Let the lights drift through your mind, soft and blue, scattered and slow. They have no destination. They are simply there, part of a world that does not need you to witness it to be real. It is real right now, as you lie here. Somewhere far below the surface of the sea, something is rising. Something ancient is drifting through the dark. And here you are, warm, still, breathing. The seafloor is not flat. It's easy to imagine the bottom of the ocean as a vast, featureless plain, a kind of ultimate basement beneath everything, smooth and still and unremarkable. But the reality is almost the opposite. The seafloor is as varied as any landscape on land, and in many places far more dramatic, more rugged, more extreme than anything you could walk across or climb. There are mountain ranges down there that dwarf anything on the surface. The mid-ocean ridge is the longest mountain range on Earth. It runs for more than 60,000 kilometers, threading through every ocean basin on the planet like a seam on a great sphere, rising from the seafloor where tectonic plates pull apart and molten rock wells up to fill the gap. In some places, the ridge rises high enough to break the surface and form islands. Iceland is one of them, sitting astride the mid-Atlantic ridge, its terrain a mixture of volcanic basalt and glacial ice, a surface expression of forces that extend all the way down through the crust to the mantle. The rest of the ridge, nearly all of it, lies hidden beneath kilometers of water, unseen and largely unmapped in detail. It is one of the most geologically active places on Earth. Earthquakes shake it constantly. Hydrothermal vents dot its length, pouring superheated mineral-rich water into the cold ocean. New seafloor is being created along its spine at this very moment. A centimeter here, a centimeter there, plates slowly spreading apart, and the gap filling in behind them with fresh stone from below. The Atlantic Ocean is getting wider every year, only by a few centimeters, and only on timescales that require millions of years to become truly meaningful. But it is widening. The continent you are on is drifting, slowly, away from the one on the other side of the ocean. This has been happening since the supercontinent Pangaea began to break apart roughly 200 million years ago. The ocean that separates Europe and Africa from the Americas did not always exist. It opened, centimeter by centimeter, year by year, into the body of water it is now. The deep ocean is not still. It is always in motion, always changing, always building and destroying, on timescales that make human history feel like a very brief moment. In the other direction, where plates collide rather than spread, the seafloor is forced downward. One plate slides beneath another in a process called subduction. And where it goes under, the seafloor descends into a trench. These trenches are the deepest places on Earth, zones of tremendous geological power. The largest earthquakes ever recorded have originated along these subduction zones. Volcanoes form in long chains above the descending plate, and the seafloor that was created at a mid-ocean ridge, sometimes tens of millions of years ago, is slowly being returned to the mantle that made it. The ocean floor is, in this sense, temporary. It is born. It travels slowly across the ocean basin over millions of years, and then it is consumed. The entire oceanic crust recycles itself on a timescale of roughly 100 to 200 million years. The oldest known ocean floor is only about that age. The continents are far older. Some continental rocks are over 4 billion years old. But the seafloor renews itself constantly, drawn into the earth and remade. You don't need to hold this in detail. Just let it be the sense of a world that is moving beneath the still surface, grinding and reshaping on timescales that no living thing was ever built to fully feel. Let your breathing slow a little more. Let the warmth around you be enough. There are places on the seafloor where the landscape looks nothing like what you would expect from a sea bottom. And two of the most remarkable are the underwater rivers and the brine pools. Turbidity currents form when dense, cold, sediment-heavy water cascades off the edges of continental shelves and flows along the bottom. Like rivers on land, they carve channels as they go, cutting deep grooves into the continental slopes that can extend for hundreds of kilometers. These channels become submarine canyons, ravines in the seafloor that rival anything on land in scale and depth. The Jemshug Canyon in the Bering Sea is deeper and broader than the Grand Canyon. It sits in total darkness, rarely visited, its walls dropping for kilometers, its floor layered with sediment carried from the Alaskan coast across millions of years. To descend into it would be to move through a world where every surface is shaped by processes that operated long before any human walked the earth. Submarine canyons funnel nutrients and organic matter from the productive coastal waters to the deep sea, making the areas around their mouths zones of comparative richness in an otherwise sparse environment. They are the arteries of the deep, carrying the chemistry of the surface world down into the permanent dark. And then there are the brine pools. In certain parts of the deep ocean, very salty water seeps out of the seafloor. Brine that is so much denser than the surrounding seawater that it doesn't mix with it. Instead, it collects in depressions on the seafloor, forming lakes and pools that exist beneath the sea but are separate from it. They have their own surfaces, their own visible shorelines. Submersibles approaching them report something deeply strange and visually arresting. The sensation of flying over a lake while already submerged in a sea. Most things that enter a brine pool quickly die. The salt concentration is several times higher than the surrounding ocean. The oxygen nearly absent, the chemistry laced with hydrogen sulfide. But at the edges, where the chemistry grades from lethal to merely extreme, communities of organisms have formed. Mussels, tube worms, bacteria specialized for this particular edge between worlds. Life, as it so often does in the deep, finding the one narrow band of conditions where it can hold on. Let these images settle into you softly. The underwater canyons in their silence. The brine pools with their impossible shorelines. the creatures at every edge. One of the most significant things about the deep ocean is not any single creature or geological feature. It is the sediment. Over the billions of years that the ocean has existed, things have been raining down from above. The tiny shells of surface organisms dying and sinking. Volcanic ash blown into the upper atmosphere and settling slowly through kilometers of water. Dust from the continents, carried by wind over the sea, and then by gravity to the bottom. Even barely detectable particles from space, cosmic dust arriving continuously from beyond the Earth. These things settle to the seafloor, layer by layer, year by year, century by century, building up a record that extends back through time with a completeness that nothing on land can match. The deep ocean sediment is, in a sense, the memory of the planet. When scientists drill cores into this sediment, long cylinders of compressed history, sometimes going back tens of millions of years, they can read in those layers a chronicle of everything that has happened at the surface. They find the signatures of ice ages, marked by the changing proportions of oxygen isotopes in the fossil shells of foraminifera, tiny single-celled organisms that floated near the surface, died, and fell. They find the ash layers from ancient volcanic eruptions, sometimes identifiable by their chemistry to specific volcanoes on specific continents. They find, at a particular depth corresponding to about 66 million years ago, a thin layer enriched in iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids, marking the moment when a large impactor struck the planet and ended the age of the dinosaurs. The deep ocean floor is a library, patient, dark, complete, and it is full of other things too. Nodules of manganese and other metals, precipitated slowly out of the seawater over millions of years, accumulating on the abyssal plains in dark, lumpy fields that stretch for hundreds of kilometers. Each nodule, roughly the size of a potato, built over millions of years at a rate of a few millimeters per million years, they contain cobalt, nickel, copper, and rare earth elements, materials that modern technology increasingly depends on. These nodules represent an extraordinary resource. They also represent a difficult question. The ecosystems of the abyssal plains, while sparse compared to vent communities or shallow coral reefs, are not empty. Bacteria coat the surfaces of the nodules. Tiny organisms live in the sediment around them, species found nowhere else, adapted to this particular quiet darkness over millions of years. If heavy machinery were sent to vacuum up these nodules, the disruption would spread far beyond the immediate area. Sediment plumes would drift for kilometers in the slow, deep currents, settling on organisms downwind of the machines. The recovery time for these habitats, if they could recover at all, would be measured in decades to centuries. The organisms are too slow-growing, too specialized, too dependent on conditions that took an unimaginable length of time to establish. This is one of the deep ocean's central questions right now, held quietly by the people who study it. A world full of materials that modern civilization needs, against a world of organisms and ecosystems that took unimaginable lengths of time to come to be, and that we are only now beginning to understand. There is no easy answer, but there is value in simply knowing that the question exists. Let that be a thought without urgency. It doesn't need resolving tonight. The acoustic world of the deep ocean is worth a quiet moment. because it is one of the least intuitive things about a world that already strains intuition. The ocean is not silent. Sound travels through water far more efficiently than through air. It moves roughly 4 times faster, and it carries much, much farther. In air, a sound might be heard for a few kilometers on a still day. In water, a low-frequency sound can travel for hundreds of kilometers, sometimes much more. There is a layer in the ocean, at a depth where temperature and pressure combine to create a minimum in the speed of sound, where sound waves entering the layer are bent back inward by the physics of refraction, becoming trapped and propagating horizontally for extraordinary distances. This layer is called the seafloor channel, for sound fixing and ranging, and it acts like a natural acoustic waveguide, funneling low-frequency sound around the globe. Blue whales use this channel to communicate. Their calls, among the lowest frequency sounds made by any animal, travel through the seafloor channel for hundreds of kilometers, possibly crossing entire ocean basins. When researchers first detected these calls with underwater microphones in the mid-20th century, they weren't sure what they were hearing. The sounds seemed too powerful, too far-ranging, too complex to be animal in origin. The ocean is full of sound that we only began to hear when we learned how to listen. Researchers have cataloged unexplained sounds from hydrophone recordings, sounds that don't match any known biological or geological source. Some are seasonal, some appear only once, some have been tentatively explained since they were first recorded, others remain genuinely open questions. There is something fascinating and not frightening about these unidentified sounds. The ocean is so vast, and our ability to listen to it so recent, that it would be surprising if we already understood everything it was saying. In a world without light, sound becomes the primary medium for information. Pulses and calls and low moans carry farther than anything visible. The deep ocean is full of voices moving through the cold dark, and we are only learning the language. You can let your mind go soft now. There is nothing required. Let the sounds of the deep drift through your awareness, low, slow, fading with distance. Let them be shapes of meaning you don't need to decipher. The ocean moves, too, in ways that shape the world above. The great deep ocean currents, driven by differences in temperature and salinity between water masses, are part of what oceanographers call the thermohaline circulation, the global conveyor belt of ocean water. Cold, dense water sinks in the polar regions and flows slowly along the deep ocean floor, while warmer surface water moves to replace it. This circulation distributes heat around the planet, moderates climates, carries nutrients from the deep to productive surface regions. A single parcel of water moving through this system may spend hundreds of years in the deep before returning to the surface. The water on the seafloor in some parts of the ocean has been there since before modern states were founded. It is old water, slow water, carrying the chemical signature of the surface from which it descended long ago. These currents are not visible from the shore. They have no waves, no foam, no dramatic motion. They are simply flows in the dark, slow as geological time, carrying the heat and chemistry of the planet from one place to another. Let that image settle. Water moving in the dark, carrying what it was given at the surface, slowly becoming something else, slowly returning. The ocean as a kind of memory, the deep as a kind of patience. You can let yourself become heavier now. Let the dark be comfortable. The thoughts don't need to hold their shape far out in the deep. Beyond the reach of any light we have ever sent down, things are still happening. They are happening right now, as you lie here. They have been happening since before there were eyes to see them. They will continue long after any instrument we might build has fallen silent. This is one of the things the deep ocean asks us to sit with, gently and without urgency. The idea that most of reality operates without us, not against us, not indifferent to us in any hostile sense. Simply proceeding, as it always has, in its own time, and by its own logic, in places we have barely visited and mostly haven't seen. There is something surprisingly restful in that idea, once you let it settle without looking for a conclusion. We are not responsible for the deep. We did not create it, and we cannot control it. It was here long before any human stood on a shore and looked out at the horizon, and it will be here long after. What we can do, and what scientists and explorers have been doing for generations now, is look. Carefully, slowly, with instruments that extend our senses into places our bodies cannot go. The tools have gotten better with each passing decade. Remotely operated vehicles, guided by cables from ships on the surface, can now carry high-definition cameras and robotic arms into the deep, hovering over hydrothermal vents, collecting samples without crushing the delicate organisms around them, documenting species that no one has ever seen before. Some of these dives last for many hours. The operators on the surface sit in darkened rooms watching video feeds from kilometers below, guiding the arms of their remote machine with a precision that looks, from the outside, almost like surgery. They see things that no human eye has ever seen, and they record them carefully to bring back to the surface. Autonomous underwater vehicles, ones that don't need a cable, that navigate by preset programs or by onboard intelligence, can now range more freely. They map terrain as they go, log chemical signatures and temperature gradients, follow features of interest for hundreds of kilometers, and then surface to transmit their data before diving again. They are patient in a way that human operators on expensive research ships often cannot afford to be. They can spend days in the water, returning slowly to the surface with hard drives full of information. Having seen things that no human eye has witnessed, the ocean, it turns out, is expanding one quiet inch at a time. Some of Earth's deepest earthquakes happen far beneath the sea. Most people think of earthquakes as shallow surface events, but some of the most powerful and mysterious quakes occur deep beneath the ocean, where tectonic plates grind, bend, and break under extreme pressure. These deep focus earthquakes can originate hundreds of kilometers below the surface, often in subduction zones where one plate is being forced beneath another. In some cases, these quakes are so deep and distant that they go unnoticed by anyone on land. Others send tremors that rattle entire coastlines. Scientists still don't fully understand how rocks can crack under such pressure. The conditions are extreme and the physics complex. But one thing is clear. Beneath the calm surface of the ocean, the planet is restless. The deep doesn't just host strange creatures. It holds tectonic forces as powerful as anything on land. Forces that shape the world in silence. Undersea landslides can trigger devastating tsunamis. When massive amounts of sediment suddenly collapse from a continental slope or seamount, the result is an underwater landslide, one that can displace enormous volumes of water and trigger tsunamis. These undersea avalanches are known as submarine landslides, and they can occur after earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or even as a result of gradual buildup and failure over time. One of the most famous examples, the Stoga Slide, occurred off the coast of Norway about 8,000 years ago and sent tsunami waves crashing into nearby lands. These events are rare, but when they happen, they can be catastrophic and difficult to predict. Some landslides involve more material than all the rivers of the world carry in a year. The deep may seem still, but beneath the seafloor, sediments wait under tension, poised to shift. And when they do, the ocean moves with terrifying force. These landslides move more material than any river. When an underwater landslide occurs, it doesn't just stir up sediment, it can move billions of tons of material in a single event. Some submarine landslides are larger than anything we see on land, displacing more volume than all the rivers on Earth combined might carry in a year. The scale is staggering. One massive collapse can sweep mud, sand, and rock across hundreds of kilometers of ocean floor. These slides reshape underwater landscapes, destroy communication cables, and sometimes trigger tsunamis that reach distant shores. Because they happen deep below the surface, they're often invisible until their effects are felt or discovered years later through sediment cores and bathymetric scans. It's easy to think of the ocean floor as still and settled, but it isn't. Even in darkness, gravity pulls, pressure builds, and mountains fall. The deep is always in motion, sometimes suddenly, sometimes forever. Vast underwater canyons slice through the continental shelf. Just offshore from many continents, hidden beneath the waves lie submarine canyons, massive valleys carved into the seafloor, often stretching from the edge of the continental shelf down into the abyssal plains. These canyons can be hundreds of kilometers long and several kilometers deep, rivaling the largest canyons on land. They're shaped by ancient rivers, landslides, and powerful underwater currents that continue to sculpt them even today. Some are steep and narrow, others are wide and winding. Their walls may host coral, sponges, or filter feeders clinging to the slopes. And their channels act like superhighways for sediment, nutrients, and even marine life. Though hidden from view, these canyons are vital parts of the ocean's circulatory system. Pathways that connect the shallow coastlines to the deep sea. To dive into one is to explore a world of silence, depth, and shadow, carved not by time alone, but by flow. One canyon under the sea is bigger than the Grand Canyon. Most people know the Grand Canyon as one of the largest natural wonders on land. But beneath the ocean, there's a canyon that's even longer and deeper. The Jemchuk Canyon, located in the Bering Sea. This massive underwater gorge plunges more than 212 kilometers deep and stretches wider than the Grand Canyon at its widest point. These submarine valleys funnel sediment to the abyss. Submarine canyons aren't just dramatic, they're dynamic. These deep valleys play a key role in transporting sediment from land to the deep ocean. Storm runoff, river discharge, and coastal erosion all contribute material to the continental shelf. But it's the canyons that funnel it down into the abyss. As the sediment flows, it forms turbidity currents, dense, fast-moving underwater avalanches that can travel for hundreds of kilometers along the canyon floors. These currents carve, deposit, and reshape the seafloor as they go, creating layered sediments in the deep ocean basins. Over time, this process builds up thick blankets of silt and clay that bury the ocean floor and preserve a record of Earth's past. In this way, submarine canyons act like geological arteries, carrying not just earth and stone, but the story of everything that has washed down from the land above. The ocean floor stores the history of Earth's climate. Microscopic fossils called foraminifera can be studied to reconstruct past ocean temperatures, while isotopes tell us about ice coverage and atmospheric gases. Some cores stretch back 65 million years or more, a frozen history of a living planet. Extracting them requires precision, patience, and deep-sea drilling vessels that can operate under harsh conditions. But what we gain is priceless, a long silent story of Earth buried beneath kilometers of water and written in dust. Microscopic fossils reveal past worlds now lost to time. Hidden in deep-sea sediment cores are the remains of tiny creatures that once floated near the ocean's surface. Microscopic fossils that hold vast stories. These include foraminifera, tiny shelled organisms that lived for short periods, but left behind countless preserved remains. Each species thrived under specific environmental conditions. So by identifying which foraminifera are found in which layers, scientists can reconstruct ocean temperatures, salinity, carbon levels, and climate trends going back tens of millions of years. Some of these layers correspond to global events: the rise of mammals, the retreat of glaciers, the abrupt warming of ancient oceans. What's remarkable is that these fossils are so small, most can't be seen without a microscope. Yet, they provide one of the most detailed records of Earth's ancient climate systems. They are Earth's diary, written in shells no wider than a grain of sand. Mining the deep could damage fragile ecosystems forever. In recent years, companies and governments have shown growing interest in deep-sea mining, the extraction of minerals and metals from the ocean floor. But with this interest comes serious concern. Much of the deep ocean is fragile and slow to recover, with creatures that grow slowly, reproduce rarely, and depend on specific environmental conditions. Disrupting these ecosystems, even slightly, could cause long-term damage that lasts centuries or longer. Mining machines would stir up thick plumes of sediment, smothering nearby life, and possibly spreading for miles. Entire coral communities or microbial colonies could be destroyed before they're even studied. The deep sea isn't just remote, it's vulnerable. And unlike the surface, it can't heal quickly. Scientists and conservationists warned that if we open the deep to industrial mining without full understanding, we may lose one of the most mysterious and valuable parts of the planet forever. Metal nodules litter the seafloor like alien pebbles. Scattered across vast stretches of the deep ocean floor are strange round formations called polytalic nodules. These rocky lumps look like smooth pebbles or black potatoes, but they're composed of valuable metals like manganese, cobalt, nickel, and copper. Unlike traditional ores, they don't need to be mined from rock. They sit loose on the seabed waiting to be collected. But these nodules take millions of years to form, growing just a few millimeters per century. They often host unique ecosystems with tiny organisms clinging to their surfaces or hiding in the sediment around them. To harvest them, machines would need to scrape or vacuum the seafloor, a process that could destroy habitats we've barely begun to understand. These nodules offer a glimpse of planetary time and mineral formation, untouched by human hands. They're not just resources, they're geological relics of the deep. These metals are used in phones, batteries, and satellites. The same metals found in deep-sea nodules like cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements are essential to modern life. They're used in smartphones, electric vehicle batteries, renewable energy systems, and spacecraft electronics. As global demand for these materials increases, especially for clean energy technologies, companies are searching for new sources, and the deep ocean has come into focus. Unlike land mining, which requires digging and refining, these nodules could theoretically be gathered from the seafloor with less overburden. But the trade-off is high. The potential loss of fragile, untouched ecosystems and species unknown to science. The metals may power green technologies, but their extraction could leave a scar on one of Earth's oldest, quietest realms. It's a dilemma that highlights the complexity of sustainability. How do we build a better future without destroying what we've never truly seen? We're debating whether to leave them undisturbed. As interest in deep-sea mining grows, so does the debate about whether it should happen at all. Scientists, policymakers, and conservation groups are asking, should we extract resources from a world we barely understand? There are permanent observatories on the seafloor now, instrument packages anchored to the bottom of the ocean, linked by fiber optic cables to shore stations, sending back real-time data about the temperature, chemistry, seismic activity, and biology of the deep. Some of these observatories have been in place for years. They have recorded the slow processes of the seafloor, the growth of vent communities over time, the subtle movement of tectonic plates, the passage of deep ocean currents, with a continuity that a single research expedition could never provide. We are, slowly and methodically, learning to listen to a world we can barely visit. And every time we do look, we find more than we expected. Every expedition to the deep returns with something new. Not always a dramatic discovery, not always something that makes international headlines. Sometimes it's a fish with a structure in its eye that no one has documented before. Sometimes it's a bacterial community occupying a chemical niche that no one thought anything could occupy. Sometimes it's a stretch of terrain that was suspected from satellite data, but never directly seen. A canyon, a ridge, a field of hydrothermal vents that turns out to be far larger than the initial readings suggested. Scientists estimate that more than 90% of deep-sea species have not yet been described. Not merely undiscovered, unknown, unnamed, proceeding with their lives in the dark, doing what they have always done, without any witness or record. In a world where it sometimes feels like everything has already been found, already been cataloged, already been explained, the deep ocean is one of the places where that feeling cannot hold. There is so much more to find, so much waiting, patient and unhurried, in the dark. Let that be a gentle thought. Not a call to action, not a problem to solve. Just a quiet recognition that the world is still full of things we don't yet know, and that this is not something to be anxious about. It is something to be quietly grateful for. The unknown is not a gap. It is a space, wide and patient, with room enough to wander in. There is a quality to the deep ocean that feels, at its edges, almost philosophical. It asks questions that cannot be answered by any single discipline. Not just what lives there, but what it means that life found a way there. Not just what the chemistry is, but what that chemistry tells us about the conditions under which living things can emerge. In the early days of deep-sea biology, the discovery of hydrothermal vent communities prompted scientists to reconsider a question they thought they had answered. What does life need? The answer they had given, light, water in the right proportions, turned out to be incomplete. The organisms at the vents needed none of those things in the way surface life does. They needed energy, yes, but not light energy. They needed warmth, but not warmth from the sun. They existed in a chemical world, using the gradients created by the Earth's internal heat. The way surface life uses the gradient between sunlight and shadow. This opened a door that is still wide open. If life can exist this way on Earth, it might exist this way elsewhere. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn, Europa and Enceladus, perhaps others, are known to have liquid water beneath their ice shells, kept liquid not by solar warmth, but by the tidal forces generated by the gravitational pull of their giant parent planets. That tidal heating could, in principle, produce the kind of internal chemistry that hydrothermal vents produce here on Earth. The conditions may not be identical. They would be different in ways we cannot yet specify. But the basic pattern, liquid water, chemical gradients, energy from planetary heat, would be recognizable. Scientists working on the question of life beyond Earth now look at the deep ocean as their closest analog for what an extraterrestrial ocean might look like from the inside. The organisms there are not alien. They are as terrestrial as anything alive, built from the same DNA, the same amino acids, the same fundamental chemistry as everything else on this planet. But the conditions they occupy, sunless, pressurized, chemical, ancient, are the closest thing we have to a window into how life might persist somewhere else. The deep ocean is, in this sense, not just a place to explore. It is a lens through which we can ask larger questions about what life is at its core, about where it might be found, about what we share as living things with organisms that have never known light. We are all, in our way, made of the same stuff. The carbon in your body was once in the atmosphere, and before that in the ocean, and before that in a star that ended before the Earth existed. The water in your cells has been cycling through oceans and rivers and clouds for billions of years. The chemistry that keeps you alive is ancient, refined over unimaginable spans of time, passed down through every ancestor between you and the earliest life. You are not separate from the deep. You are made of the same processes, in a different configuration, in a different place. The line between you and the tube worm in the vent field is long and winding and hard to follow, but it is there. That can be a thought you hold lightly. It asks nothing of you. It is just something that is true. Quietly, underneath everything. The pressure in the deep ocean is one of the things hardest to imagine from the surface. At the deepest points, the water above exerts a pressure of over 1,000 atmospheres, more than 1,000 times the pressure you feel right now breathing in the open air. The weight of all that water pressing inward from every direction. And yet things live there. The organisms that have evolved for the deep carry the physics of their world written into their biology. Their cell membranes are different, more fluid at low temperatures, shaped by chemistry to remain functional in conditions that would freeze and seize a surface organism's cells. Their proteins are stabilized by structural features unnecessary at normal pressure. Their bodies often lack the rigid structures, bones, hard shells, hollow spaces, that would be compressed or crushed at these depths. Instead, they are soft, yielding, flexible. They move with the water rather than against it. The famous blobfish, photographs of which have made it something of an unofficial symbol for the deep sea, looks nothing like that on the seafloor. At depth, it is a normal-looking fish, well-proportioned and functional. When it is brought to the surface in a net, removed from the pressure that gives its body its form, it becomes the sagging, formless shape that photographs show. It is a creature designed for a world you cannot visit, and it carries the evidence of that design in every cell. The deep is full of such creatures, animals that exist in perfect balance with conditions that would be lethal to us, beautiful in their adaptation, carrying in their bodies the signature of millions of years of pressure and cold and darkness. There is something worth pausing on in that. These organisms did not choose to be adapted for the deep. They were shaped over enormous spans of time by the conditions they lived in. Every structure in their biology is a response to a pressure, a temperature, a chemical gradient that has been consistent and demanding for longer than the human lineage has existed. In that sense, they are not strange. They are simply very specifically themselves, shaped by their world, the same way everything alive is shaped by its world, including you. You are shaped by the light, by the warmth, by the rhythms of day and night that have governed the surface world for all of life's history. You need oxygen, warmth, light. You have structures in your eyes tuned for the wavelengths the sun produces. You have a body clock synchronized to the turning of the planet. You are as precisely adapted to your world as the anglerfish is to its. The deep ocean does not ask you to become something you're not. It just asks you to notice that the world is larger and stranger than any one of us can hold completely. Let that be enough. Let it be a gentle thought on the edge of sleep. The climate of the planet is connected to the deep in ways that scientists are still mapping out. The ocean has been absorbing roughly 1/3 of the carbon dioxide that human activities have added to the atmosphere over the past 2 centuries. Much of that carbon ends up, through the biological pump and through chemical reactions, in the deep ocean, locked in sediment and dissolved in cold water far from the surface. This absorption has slowed the rate of atmospheric warming. It has bought time. But it has also changed the chemistry of the ocean itself. The water is more acidic now than it was before industrialization. And while the deep is buffered by the sheer volume of water, the effects of this chemical shift are beginning to be measured. Cold water corals that have been growing in the dark for thousands of years show signs of dissolving faster than they can build. The deep is patient, but it is not insensible. It responds to what happens above it, slowly and on its own timescales. The changes happening now are arriving at the deep in ways that will not be fully felt for decades or centuries, but will be recorded in the sediment, in the chemistry, in the slow lives of the organisms that live there. Scientists studying the deep ocean carry a particular kind of attention with them. They are measuring a world that is changing even as they watch it, trying to establish what the baseline is before it shifts further. Every sample they take, every video they record, every chemical measurement they log is part of a record that future scientists, living with conditions we cannot yet fully predict, will need. It is patient, careful work done in the dark, far from any recognition, and it continues now, even as you sleep. Ships are moving over deep water somewhere. Instruments are recording. Data is being transmitted from the seafloor to the surface. The slow work of understanding continues in the background of everything. You can let your thoughts thin out now. Let them lose their edges. The night is quiet around you. The deep is quiet in a way that has no comparison. A silence made not of absence, but of distance, from everything loud and fast and brief. The creatures there move slowly. The corals grow a millimeter at a time. The old shark drifts, somewhere below the surface of the ocean right now. A bioluminescent creature is making a light that no one will ever see. Not because no one is looking, but because the deep is so vast and so full that most of what happens there will always happen unwatched, in its own time, according to its own logic. There is something in that fact that is not lonely. It is simply the scale of things. Most of reality happens without an audience. The stars complete their cycles whether or not anyone watches them. The Earth's mantle convects in slow, enormous currents with nothing to observe it. The deep sea goes on, full of life and chemistry and geological change. Whether or not any human instrument is there to measure it, you are here, present in the world, noticing some small fraction of what the world is doing. That is what it is to be alive and aware, to catch glimpses of something far larger than any one perspective can hold, and to hold those glimpses with curiosity rather than the need to master them. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you are always welcome to return to deep somna whenever you need to drift away again. The deep water is cold and still. The lights in it are soft and scattered. Something old is moving slowly through the dark. Let yourself go with it. Let the depth take you gently the rest of the way. Good night.